The silence in the Suwon apartment was different now. Not the peaceful, quiet Park Soo-min had anticipated for her retirement, the kind punctuated by the gentle turning of pages, but a heavy, expectant silence that seemed to magnify the ticking of the clock on the wall. 61 years old, 1 month retired from her 35-year career as head librarian at the city library, and the meticulously planned structure of her days felt strangely hollow. Her reading list, carefully curated over years, lay untouched on the polished coffee table. The bookshelves, organized with professional precision, seemed almost mocking in their perfect order. Everything was in its place, except her. She adjusted the glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, tucking a stray strand of grey hair behind her ear, a habit honed over decades of focused work. Her husband, Choi Min-jun, also newly retired from his small but successful print shop, filled the silence differently. The booming voice of a trot singer erupted from the television in the living room, a sound that grated against Soo-min's nerves like sandpaper. He was 2 years older, more extroverted, embracing retirement with the enthusiasm of a released prisoner, eager for travel, fishing trips with friends, and long, unstructured afternoons. His relaxation felt like her dissolving. "Soo-min, are you coming to watch this?" "He's fantastic," Min-jun called out, oblivious. She murmured a non-committal response, turning back to the window overlooking a quiet street lined with ginkgo trees, their leaves just beginning to hint at autumn gold. They had planned well, financially. Their apartment was paid off, their savings adequate, supplemented by pensions. On paper, they were secure. Yet an unfamiliar anxiety fluttered beneath her ribs, a sense of being adrift in uncharted waters without a map. Her identity, so firmly anchored to the quiet competence and purposeful order of the library, felt untethered. Who was Park Soo-min without her title, her responsibilities, her familiar kingdom of books and knowledge? The question echoed in the two quiet corners of her mind. The shrill ring of her smartphone sliced through the afternoon quiet. It was Ji-woo, their daughter. Soo-min's heart gave a familiar lurch, a mix of love and apprehension. Ji-woo, 32, ambitious and driven in her demanding marketing job, had recently returned to work after her maternity leave. "Yoma?" Ji-woo's voice was thick with exhaustion, cracking slightly. I don't know what to do. Min-junny cried all morning at the daycare, and this project deadline, I can't focus. A sob broke through. "Could you, maybe just for a little while, could you help with Min-junny? Maybe a few days a week?" Soo-min closed her eyes. The implicit request hung in the air, heavy with unspoken cultural expectations, the grandmother stepping naturally into the childcare void. She pictured her grandson, little Choi Min-jun, chubby cheeks and a gummy smile. Love surged, fierce and protective. But alongside it rose the image of her carefully planned retirement schedule, language classes she wanted to take, the memoir she dreamt of writing, the quiet hours dedicated to rediscovering herself. And then, another image, the concerned face of Dr. Kim just last week during her checkup. "Your blood pressure is a little elevated, Soo-min-si. Nothing alarming yet, but you need to manage your stress. Retirement should be a time to relax, not take on new burdens." "Ji-woo-ya," Soo-min began, her voice softer than intended. "Of course I want to help. Let's talk about it properly tonight." She heard Ji-woo's sigh of relief, mingled with tears, guilt warred with a rising sense of panic. This wasn't just helping out. It felt like the beginning of a new, demanding, unpaid job, one she hadn't signed up for. The carefully constructed dam holding back her retirement anxieties seemed to crack. Min-jun wandered in, drawn by the phone call. "Ji-woo, okay?" he asked, peeling an orange. "She's finding it hard. Needs help with the baby," Soo-min said, keeping her voice neutral. "Ah, well, you'll enjoy being a grandmother," he replied easily, popping a segment into his mouth. "Keeps you young," he beamed, entirely missing the complex storm brewing behind her calm facade. His easy acceptance felt like another weight pressing down. Her quiet, intellectual retirement, the reward for decades of diligence, seemed to be receding before it had even truly begun. The first few weeks of helping out settled into a draining routine. 3, sometimes 4 days a week, Soo-min took the bus across Suwon to Ji-woo's modern, slightly cramped apartment in a newer district. Little Min-junny was adorable, a bundle of gurgles, cries, and surprisingly strong kicks. But the work was relentless, lifting the increasingly heavy baby, The endless cycle of feeding, changing, soothing, the constant vigilance, it left her physically exhausted by evening, an ache settling deep in her lower back. Her meticulously planned reading time vanished. Thoughts of language classes or memoir writing felt like distant fantasies. The emotional toll was subtler but deeper. She loved her grandson, truly, but the role felt ill-fitting, imposed. She was performing grandmotherhood, ticking boxes dictated by expectation, while her own nascent retirement identity withered. Min-jun, initially supportive, grew restless. "You're always tired when you get back," he complained one evening, flicking through TV channels. And Mrs. Han next door asked if we wanted to join them for a weekend trip to Sokcho. I had to say maybe, because I never know if you'll be free. Soo-min bit back a sharp retort. He didn't understand the bone-deep weariness, the mental fatigue of being constantly on for an infant after decades of managing quiet spaces and adult interactions. "Jiwoo needs me," she said simply. "She needs a proper nanny," Min-jun countered, not unkindly, but missing the point. "We saved for retirement, Soo-min-ah, not for you to start a second career as a babysitter." His words stung, partly because they echoed her own secret thoughts, but also because they dismissed the complexity of the situation, the filial obligation, Jiwoo's genuine stress, her own conflicting desires. Seeking solace, Soo-min found herself drawn back to her old domain, the Suwon City Library. She pushed through the heavy glass doors, the familiar scent of old paper, binding glue, and floor wax washing over her. It smelled like purpose, like belonging. But as she walked through the quiet aisles, nodding automatically to familiar patrons who gave her polite but slightly distant smiles, the feeling shifted. She wasn't the head librarian anymore. She was a visitor, a ghost haunting her former life. She saw Park Ji-young, her former subordinate, now acting head, bustling past with a stack of files. "Oh, Soo-min Sunbainim, hello!" Ji-young bowed quickly, professionally. "Good to see you enjoying your retirement." The words were friendly, standard politeness, but they landed like tiny darts. "Enjoying?" Soo-min forced a smile. "Just browsing," she murmured, feeling suddenly conspicuous, out of place. The library, once her sanctuary, now felt like a painful reminder of the identity she had lost. She retreated, the weight of her unstructured days pressing down heavier than before. Current part characters, 2,998, total characters, 7,371. Min-jun, in an attempt to cheer her up, suggested she join a calligraphy class at the local community centre. "You always liked art," he'd said hopefully. So-min dutifully attended a session. The room was bright, filled mostly with other women around her age, chatting amiably as they practiced strokes. But the brush felt clumsy in her hand, the ink messy, the enforced quietness different from the purposeful silence of her library. It felt like another performance, another attempt to fill the void with something that wasn't truly her. She didn't return for the second class. One crisp afternoon she met her friend Kim Yoon-hee for tea. Yoon-hee, who had retired from the same library system a year earlier, seemed to radiate a quiet contentment Soo-min envied. They sat in a cosy cafe near Hwaseong Fortress, the aroma of roasted coffee beans mingling with the scent of autumn leaves outside. "It's harder than I expected," Soo-min confessed, stirring her tea. "The days feel so long, and Jiwoo needs so much help." Yoon-hee listened patiently, her expression kind. She didn't offer easy platitudes. Instead, she talked about her own initial struggles with aimlessness. "I tried knitting," she chuckled, and nearly poked my eye out. "Then I found the pottery studio at the community centre. My first pots were disasters." She showed Soo-min photos on her phone, lopsided bowls, uneven mugs, but Yoon-hee's face glowed with pride. "It's not about being perfect, Soo-min-ah. It's about the process, getting my hands dirty, creating something even if it's wonky." Yoon-hee also mentioned volunteering at a community garden. Feeling the sun, seeing things grow, it gives the week some shape. She looked at Soo-min gently. "The books are still there, Soo-min, but maybe you need to write a new chapter, not just reread the old ones. And it has to be your chapter, not Jiwoo's or Min-jun's." The words resonated, but the how remained elusive. That evening, the tension between Soo-min and Min-jun finally snapped. He was excited about a TV documentary on hiking trails in Gangwon province. "We should go next week. Just pack a bag and go." "Next week?" Soo-min echoed, exhaustion making her voice sharp. "Min-jun, see? I'm looking after Min-jun-hee 3 days next week. and frankly, I don't have the energy for mountain hiking." "So Jiwoo dictates our retirement now?" he retorted, his usual cheerfulness gone, replaced by frustration. "Is this it? You tied to the baby, me waiting around? I worked hard for 38 years. I want to live a little." Soo-min shot back, the injustice stinging. "I want a purpose, Min-jun. Not just waiting for the next trip or the next TV show. Your relaxing feels like my dissolving." The words hung in the air, raw and revealing. They stared at each other, the chasm between their retirement dreams suddenly vast and terrifying. Later, alone in bed, Soo-min found herself scrolling through their online bank account. Their savings were comfortable, yes, but she noticed the small, steady attrition. Gifts for the baby, extra groceries bought for Jiwoo's place, her own minor medical co-pays. It wasn't alarming yet, but the buffer felt thinner, adding a layer of quiet financial anxiety to her already burdened mind. The meticulous planner in her felt control, slipping away on all fronts. The pressure cooker of Soo-min's life hissed, steam building towards an inevitable release. It came, as crises often do, from multiple directions at once. Jiwoo called, her voice tight with panic. "Ioma, my sitter, she just quit out of the blue, and I have the biggest presentation of my career on Thursday. The regional VP is flying in. Ioma, please, I know it's asking too much, but could you possibly cover full-time just this week? I'll find someone else, I promise, but right now." The desperation in her daughter's voice twisted Soo-min's heart. Before Soo-min could even process this new demand, Min-jun walked in, waving flight confirmations like a trophy. "Surprise! I booked us that weekend getaway to Jeju Island. Non-refundable, best deal. Just what we need to clear the air, eh? We leave Friday morning." He beamed, oblivious to the internal chaos his announcement unleashed. Jeju, sunshine, relaxation. It felt like a solution from another planet, completely disconnected from the reality of her life. Full-time grandmother for a week, possibly longer. A non-refundable trip demanding her presence. Her elevated blood pressure throbbed at her temples. Dr. Kim's warning about stress echoed. She felt trapped, pulled in opposing directions, her own needs completely submerged beneath the demands and desires of others. She needed air. She needed the library. Driven by an instinct she didn't fully understand, Soo-min grabbed her coat and hurried out, leaving Min-jun staring after her, confused. The walk cooled her cheeks, but not the turmoil inside. She pushed through the library doors, seeking the familiar scent, the ordered silence. But instead of silence, she heard raised voices, crying. Near the children's section, a scene of mild chaos unfolded. A young woman, a temporary librarian Soo-min vaguely recognized, stood flustered amidst a circle of restless preschoolers and their exasperated mothers. Story time had clearly gone off the rails. One child was wailing, another was attempting to climb a bookshelf, and the temporary librarian looked completely overwhelmed, her voice barely audible above the din. Without conscious thought, Soo-min moved forward. Old instincts kicked in. "Annyeonghaseyo," she said, her voice calm but carrying authority, honed over decades. The mothers looked up, surprised. The temporary librarian looked relieved. Soo-min knelt down, making eye contact with the crying child. "What's wrong, little one? Did the story dragon seem too scary?" She addressed the would-be climber gently but firmly. "Bookshelves are for books, little adventurer, not for climbing." Drawing on years of experience, she smoothly transitioned into a simple fingerplay song. Her voice, clear and engaging, captured the children's attention. Within minutes, the crying stopped, the climber sat down, and the restless energy subsided, replaced by focused curiosity. She segued into a short, interactive story, her gestures animated, her pacing perfect. The mothers relaxed, the temporary librarian watched with grateful awe. When the impromptu session ended, a sense of quiet competence washed over Soo-min, potent and deeply satisfying. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was the feeling of using her skills and of creating order from chaos, of connecting. In that moment, standing amidst the scattered cushions and now calm children, clarity struck her like a physical force. She couldn't keep reacting to Jiwoo's crises, to Min-jun's plans, to the ghost of her past role. She still had value, immense value, but she needed to deploy it purposefully, on her own terms. She needed to build her own structure, define her own contribution. The path forward wasn't about reclaiming the past or fulfilling others' expectations. It was about forging something new, That evening, the conversation with Jiwoo was one of the hardest Sumin had ever had. She sat at her kitchen table, phone pressed to her ear, taking deep, steadying breaths. Jiwoo ya, she began, her voice gentle but firm. I love you and I adore Minjunni. I will help you, but I cannot be your full-time childcare solution, not even for this week. There was a stunned silence on the other end, followed by a rush of tearful protests. But Ioma, the presentation, what am I going to do? We will figure it out, Sumin said calmly. I can take him tomorrow and Tuesday afternoon as planned. For the rest, we need to find another way. Have you looked into emergency backup care services? Asked your husband's mother? Spoken to HR about options? She didn't offer solutions, but prompts, shifting the burden of problem-solving back to her daughter, while still offering concrete bounded support. I will consistently help you 2 afternoons a week, reliably. That's what I can offer sustainably without compromising my own health and well-being. You need a more permanent arrangement, my daughter. It was difficult. Jiwoo felt abandoned initially, hurt. But Sumin held her ground, speaking with love, but also with the undeniable clarity of her decision. Slowly, Jiwoo's panic subsided, replaced by a grudging acceptance, then a flicker of determination. Okay, Ioma, okay, I'll make some calls. The conversation ended not with perfect harmony, but with a new, more realistic understanding. A boundary had been drawn, paved with love, but reinforced with necessity. Next came Minjun. He was still slightly sulking about her abrupt departure earlier. So Min sat beside him on the sofa, the blare of the TV muted for once. Yobo, she said, using the affectionate term, about Jeju and about everything. She explained her feelings. The sense of purposelessness, the draining effect of the unstructured childcare, her need for something meaningful that was hers alone. She didn't blame him, but shared her internal struggle honestly. I need structure, Minjun-si. Not the rigid structure of work, perhaps, but a rhythm. A reason to get up that feels like mine. He listened, truly listened this time, his initial defensiveness softening as he heard the vulnerability beneath her words. So, the library thing today? It reminded me of what I'm good at, she admitted, and what I miss. Not being the boss, but using my skills. Connecting with people through knowledge, through stories. She explained her idea, still forming, perhaps starting a reading group for seniors or a basic digital skills workshop. Something small, maybe just once or twice a week, something that gives me purpose. He was quiet for a moment. So, Jeju is out? This weekend, yes, Sumin confirmed gently. I need to focus on setting things up here, but maybe we can plan a shorter trip later. Somewhere closer. Or find something we both enjoy doing together here in Suwon. He sighed, a long exhalation. All right, Sumina, all right. I don't fully understand needing more structure when you're finally free. But I understand you're not happy. We'll figure it out. He reached over and patted her hand awkwardly. It wasn't a sweeping declaration, but it was a start, a compromise. He decided to go fishing with a friend that weekend instead. Inspired by her moment of clarity at the library and Yoonhee's quiet encouragement, Sumin spent the next few days researching and planning. The idea of a reading circle specifically for seniors began to take shape. Many community centres offered singing or exercise classes, but fewer focused on intellectual engagement for older adults. She remembered the loneliness expressed by some elderly patrons at her old library, the desire for connection and mental stimulation. She drafted a simple proposal. Silver Chapters, a reading circle for seniors. Twice a month, focusing on Korean short stories and poetry, followed by facilitated discussion. She outlined potential reading lists, discussion prompts, even ideas for guest speakers later on. Holding the finished proposal printed neatly felt good, purposeful. With a flutter of nervousness, she made an appointment at the neighborhood community center. The director, a brisk woman in her 40s, listened politely as Sumin presented her idea, highlighting her professional background. A reading circle? We haven't had one just for seniors before, the director mused, tapping a pen. Most prefer the trot singing class. Sumin didn't waver. Singing is wonderful for lifting spirits, she agreed smoothly, but reading and discussing stories nourishes the mind and builds deeper connections. I believe there's a need for this kind of engagement too. She spoke with the quiet confidence of experience. The director considered it. Your experience is certainly relevant, Mrs. Park. We could offer it as a trial program. Room 3 is free on Wednesday afternoons. We can put up a notice. Let's see if anyone signs up. It wasn't a resounding endorsement, but it was an opening, a space, a chance. Su-min felt a surge of energy she hadn't experienced since leaving her job. She spent the following week preparing meticulously, selecting the first short story, a poignant piece by Park Won-soo, crafting thoughtful questions, even arranging the chairs in room 3 in her mind. The first Wednesday arrived, damp and grey. Su-min stood nervously by the door of room 3, smoothing her blouse. What if no one came? What if they came and hated it? Min-jun had wished her good luck, a new understanding in his eyes. Ji-woo had sent an encouraging text, having managed to find temporary childcare through a neighbour network. Slowly, people began to trickle in. An elderly gentleman leaning heavily on a cane. 2 women who seemed to be friends, chatting quietly. A woman who looked vaguely familiar, perhaps a former library patron. In total, 6 people. Not a huge crowd, but enough. More than enough. Su-min took a deep breath and began, her voice a little shaky at first, then steadying as she introduced the story, her passion for literature overriding her nerves. She read a key passage aloud, her librarian's cadence returning naturally. And then she opened the floor for discussion. There was a hesitant silence initially. Then the gentleman with the cane cleared his throat. "That part," he said slowly, "about leaving one's hometown. It reminded me of when I first came to Suwon after the war." And just like that, the conversation started. Timidly at first, then gaining momentum as others shared their own memories, interpretations, feelings sparked by the story. They talked about loss, resilience, family, the changing face of Korea. Su-min guided the discussion gently, ensuring everyone felt heard, drawing connections, asking probing questions. The hour flew by. Current part characters, 3,680. Total characters, 2,107.35. As the session drew to a close, there was a warmth in the room that had nothing to do with the heating system. The participants lingered, chatting amongst themselves, thanking Su-min. "This was lovely," said one of the women. "It's nice to use my brain for something other than worrying about my grandchildren's grades." The gentleman with the cane nodded vigorously. "Next meeting is in 2 weeks?" "Yes," Su-min confirmed, a genuine smile finally reaching her eyes, easing the worry lines that had etched themselves there over the past months. 2 weeks. We'll be reading Kim Yoo-jung next. Walking home under the clearing sky, Su-min felt a lightness she hadn't known was possible. It wasn't the grand, structured purpose of her former career, but it was hers. Born from her skills, offered on her terms, meeting a genuine need. It was a small anchor, but it held. Life didn't magically become perfect. There were still days when the silence of the apartment felt heavy, when Min-jun's choice of television grated, when worries about Ji-woo or their finances surfaced. Childcare remained a negotiation. Ji-woo was trying different options, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, and Su-min still provided her agreed-upon 2 afternoons, sometimes feeling the familiar tug of exhaustion or guilt. Her blood pressure needed monitoring. Retirement wasn't a static state of bliss, she realized, but an ongoing process of adjustment, of finding and maintaining balance. She and Min-jun started taking shorter walks together around Hwaseong Fortress, finding pleasure in the shared history and the changing seasons. He even started reading one of the books from her reading circle list, surprising her with his occasional insightful comments. They didn't always agree, but they were communicating better, respecting each other's needs for both connection and individual space. He still went on longer fishing trips with his friends sometimes, and she found she didn't mind. She had her own fulfilling activities now. The Silver Chapters group grew slowly, steadily. Su-min found deep satisfaction in preparing for the sessions, in witnessing the connections formed among the members, in the simple act of sharing stories. It wasn't just about literature, it was about combating the isolation that could so easily creep into later life. Sometimes, after a particularly lively discussion, she would treat herself to a cup of good coffee at the cafe Yoon-hee had introduced her to, looking out at the bustling Suwon streets. She still meticulously arranged her bookshelves at home, but now the act felt less like a desperate attempt to impose order on chaos, and more like a quiet affirmation of her enduring love for the world contained within them. The silence in the apartment no longer felt empty, but held the potential for quiet reflection, preparation for her reading group, or simply peaceful coexistence with her husband. One afternoon, sitting by the window with a cup of barley tea, watching the golden ginkgo leaves drift down, Su-min didn't feel adrift anymore. She felt anchored. Not rigidly fixed, but gently tethered to a life that was still unfolding. A life where her past experience illuminated her present purpose. The future wasn't a void to be feared, but a series of chapters waiting to be written, one thoughtful day at a time. She picked up a pen, not for a grand memoir, perhaps not yet, but to jot down some ideas for the next Silver Chapters meeting. And she began to write. The digital skills workshop idea also took root, albeit more slowly. Seeing some of the Silver Chapters members struggle with smartphones, navigating Kakao Talk group chats, accessing online banking, or even just reading news portals, highlighted another need. It tapped into her librarian core, connecting people with information, empowering them with tools for navigating the modern world. It took more courage to propose this second group. Technology felt less like her natural domain than literature. But Yoon-hee, ever supportive, encouraged her. You learned the library's entire digital catalogue system. Su-min-ah, teaching basic smartphone skills will be easy for you. Su-min spent hours practicing on her own phone, simplifying steps, anticipating common frustrations. She created large print handouts with clear screenshots. She recruited Min-jun, surprisingly tech-savvy from his printing business days, to help her practice explaining concepts simply. He grumbled good-naturedly but seemed pleased to be asked, another small step in their evolving partnership. She launched Digital Eagles Smartphone Basics for Seniors at the community centre on a different afternoon. The turnout was even larger than for the reading group. The initial session was chaotic, a cacophony of notification sounds, confused questions about Wi-Fi passwords, fumbling fingers on small screens. But So-min, drawing on the patience she'd honed managing library patrons and, more recently, her grandson, navigated it with calm determination. She broke everything down into tiny, manageable steps, connecting to Wi-Fi, adjusting font size, sending a simple Kakao message, taking and sharing a photo. Each small success was met with exclamations of delight and relief from the participants. Mrs. Choi, a woman in her late 70s, beamed as she successfully sent her first photo, a picture of her cat, to a daughter living overseas. Mr. Kang, who had previously only used his phone for calls, managed to look up the bus schedule online. These workshops were more tiring than the reading circle, demanding a different kind of energy, but the immediate, tangible results were incredibly rewarding. Seeing the participants gain confidence, bridging the digital divide that often isolated older generations, gave Su-min a powerful sense of contribution. It wasn't just about teaching skills. It was about fostering independence and connection in an increasingly digital world. Her weeks found a new rhythm. 2 afternoons dedicated to Silver Chapters preparation and meetings. 1 afternoon for the Digital Eagles workshop. 2 afternoons reliably spent with little Min-jun, still tiring, but now framed by boundaries and balanced by her own fulfilling activities. The remaining time felt less like a void and more like space. Space for walks with Min-jun, coffee with Yoon-hee, quiet reading, or simply resting. Financial anxiety hadn't vanished entirely. The cost of living in Suwon remained a reality, but it lessened as her sense of purpose grew. Having meaningful activities that didn't revolve around spending money helped. She and Min-jun started budgeting more consciously together, aligning their spending with their shared and individual priorities. They discovered simple pleasures, like exploring different neighborhood markets or trying recipes using seasonal ingredients. One evening, Ji-woo called, not in crisis, but just to chat. She talked about her work, about Min-jun's latest antics, and mentioned the new, reliable part-time nanny she'd finally found through a local parents' network. It's still hectic, Ioma, she admitted, but manageable. And thank you, really, for the help you give, and for showing me how to figure things out. There was a new respect in her daughter's voice. Su-min felt a quiet warmth spread through her chest. Setting boundaries hadn't broken the bond. It had ultimately strengthened it by fostering mutual respect and reliance. The seasons turned. Winter brought crisp air and bare ginkgo branches outside the apartment window. Spring saw the return of blossoms along the Suwon-chon stream where Su-min and Min-jun sometimes walked. Life settled into its new, adapted rhythm. The Silver Chapters group became a fixture at the community centre, a small, vibrant community in itself. They celebrated members' birthdays with shared rice cakes, exchanged book recommendations beyond the official readings, and offered quiet support during times of illness or family difficulty. So-min was no longer just the facilitator. She was part of the fabric, learning as much from the members' life experiences as they learned from the literature. The Digital Eagles workshop also continued, with Su-min occasionally bringing in guest helpers. Tech-savvy university students volunteering for community service hours, bridging generational gaps in unexpected ways. She even learned a few new smartphone tricks herself from the younger volunteers. Her relationship with Min-jun found a comfortable equilibrium. They still had different ideas about the ideal pace of retirement, but they navigated these differences with more humour and understanding. He took pride in her community centre work, occasionally boasting about his wife, the popular professor, to his fishing buddies. She learned to appreciate his need for spontaneity, sometimes even joining him on impromptu excursions, finding enjoyment in the unplanned moments. They discovered a shared interest in historical dramas, spending cosy evenings debating plot points. Su-min still visited the city library, but now it felt different. No longer a ghost haunting her past, she felt like an esteemed visitor, a respected elder. Park Ji-young, the acting head, sometimes sought her advice informally on programming ideas or handling tricky patron situations. Su-min offered her insights generously,